Our presentation today covers the rights of the accused. Our presenters include Gabriela Pineda-Cespedes, Trinity Saley, and John Doty. Number 3. In the Bill of Rights, one major importance were the rights of the accused. The Fourth Amendment addresses unreasonable search and seizure. Included are the right to privacy, the right to be secure in persons, houses, papers, and effects. Warrants must be issued upon probable cause, describing the place to be searched and the persons or things to be seized. The Fifth Amendment, self-incrimination, requires indictment by a grand jury with probable cause. It also forbids double jeopardy, cannot be compelled to witness against oneself, nor be deprived of life, liberty, or property without due process of law, nor shall private property be taken for public use without just compensation. Number 5, Sixth Amendment, right to an attorney, as well as a speedy public trial by an impartial jury, be informed of charges, confronted by a witness against, have a process for gaining favorable witnesses, and have counsel for defense. And 6, here are 2 court cases as examples of the impact of the Bill of Rights. First is New Jersey versus TLO, named Disguise, 1985. And the Fourth Amendment, unreasonable search and seizure. A high school student was suspected of having cigarettes in her purse. School officials searched her purse, and what they found in there, is it still my turn?
Yeah.
Okay. They found cigarettes, marijuana, and some money, and they arrested her, and she filed a suit. And ultimately, the court ruled that in this particular case, the illegal search and seizure was not illegal. Although generally, in fact, they said officials may conduct reasonable warrantless searches without probable cause standard normally applied to the Fourth Amendment. The decision searching TLO's purse was reasonable. Okay, that's my slides.
I think you were also supposed to read Mapp versus Ohio.
Does that sound okay?
I think this is also one of your slides, John.
You think what?
This is one of your slides also.
Oh, right. In Mapp versus Ohio, 1961, involves the Fourth and the 14th Amendment. The Fourth was extended into the 14th to deal with some civil rights. The event, police raided Mapp's home looking for a bombing suspect. Mapp refused to let them in without a warrant. Important element was the exclusionary rule that not just for federal cases, but also applies to states through the 14th Amendment's due process clause. Well, in her house, they found obscene material, evidence obtained illegally, which they used to convict her. The exclusionary rule that applies in federal cases was extended to apply to state cases, which is what made it so important. So a warrantless search and seizure would not allow any found material to be used as evidence in a state as well as in a federal trial.
Now, for the Supreme Court decisions about rights of the accused, there was 2 examples of court cases, which was Brady versus Maryland, which contained things involving the Fifth Amendment, which prohibited prosecution without withholding evidence, and favorable to the accused, that is material to guilt or punishment. And in this case, Bradley took part in a robbery, but didn't kill the victim. Bradley's partner did.
Mm-hmm.
And in the case Mapp versus Ohio, it involved the Fourth Amendment, which extended to the states as well as federal governments, which ruled using the exclusionary rule, which was said that a prosecutor cannot use evidence obtained illegally, and the Supreme Court used the principle of selective incorporation expanded in the Fourth Amendment to the 14th Amendment due process clause. And in this case, the police had raided Mapp's home and looked for a bombing suspect, and Mapp refused to let them in without a warrant. Something important was the exclusionary rule, which not just the federal cases, but also applied to state cases in the 14th Amendment. Its due process clause, which while in her home they found obscene material, which was evidence that they obtained illegally, which they tried to use against her. The exclusionary rule that applied in federal cases also applies to the state map cases. In the case Escobedo versus Illinois, it involved the Sixth Amendment, which was right to console of state in interrogation. In January 1960, Manuel Valtierra was shot and killed by someone else and his brother-in-law. The Chicago Police Department arrested Benedict Di Garlando and Danny Escobedo, and Escobedo had requested to see his lawyer, and him and his lawyer were both denied to see each other. And this was a big problem because he was not advised of his right to remain silent and that he didn't need to answer questions. And this was later used in his case to help him out. That was taken in Supreme Court, which basically said that they couldn't use it against him because he was not made clear of his rights.
Mm-hmm.
And in Terry versus Ohio, it had involved the Sixth Amendment, which was the right to counsel to states in interrogation. And in 1963, a Cleveland detective had observed Terry and two other men acting suspiciously, and while they were trying to apparently rob a store, and the officers had patted them down and they found weapons. And the court basically said that this evidence was able to be used because it was lawful search, because they had a reasonable suspicion that they had weapons on them. And in the case Katz versus the United States, it had also involved the Fourth Amendment, which is protecting the people, not the place, for an unreasonable search. Some FBI agents had attached the listening device to the outside of a phone booth and had recorded a conversation of Charles Katz, which was a suspect of gambling without a warrant. And the Supreme Court had made the decision that the government's actions had violated his privacy, which Katz used in court to say that it was justifiable and that it shouldn't have been used against his case because, again, it was a violation of his privacy rights, and because their case was basically around the fact of what they heard on the telephone booth recording, and it caused the evidence to become unreasonable.
Mm-hmm.
All right, and then for legislation and executive orders about rights of the accused, the rights of the accused in the United States are protected through a combination of constitutional amendments, legislation, and executive actions. The foundation of these protects particularly the 4th, 5th, 6th, 8th, and 14th Amendments. These amendments together act as a safeguard towards individuals from unreasonable searches and seizures, self-incrimination, denial of legal counsel, excessive bail, cruel punishment, and violation of due process. The 14th Amendment is especially important because it applies these protections to the states, ensuring that all defendants receive fair treatment under the law. In the case Miranda v. Arizona, this case involves the Fifth Amendment, which protects against self-incrimination. In 1996, Ernesto Miranda was arrested in Arizona for kidnapping and rape. Ernesto was interrogated for 2 hours. He was not read his rights and was never given his rights. He had confessed, which was used against him. The court has deemed that custodial interrogation are forced and suspects must be clearly informed of their rights before questioning. In the case Brady v. Maryland, this involves the Fifth Amendment, which is a due process clause. In 1963, John Brady and a companion were charged with murder. Brady had admitted to involvement in the crime but claimed his accomplice committed the actual killing. Before that, Brady's attorney asked prosecutions to turn over his accomplice's statements. Prosecutions withheld a confession in which the accomplice admitted to the killing. Brady was convicted and sentenced to death. court deemed that withholding justifying evidence violates the defendant's rights to due process.
Hmm.
In our last case, Gideon versus Mainwright, this case involves the Sixth Amendment, which is the right to counsel. In 1963, Clarence Earl Gideon was charged in Florida with felony burglary. He was not able to afford a lawyer and requested a court-appointed attorney. The judge had denied his request because the Florida law only required attorneys for capital cases. Since Gideon's request was denied, Gideon was forced to represent himself, which he was then convicted and sentenced to prison. When Gideon was in prison, he had handwritten a petition to the U.S. Supreme Court. From then, the court has deemed the right to counsel is fundamental and states must provide an attorney to any defendant that cannot afford one in felony cases.